Well, the debate around nuclear energy is ramping up and it's only going to increase as we get closer to the next election. We know the opposition leader Peter Dutton says it's time for Australia to wake up and embrace nuclear power. But he's got the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the Energy Minister Chris Bowen standing in the way. And we've spoken to some high-profile figures who are for nuclear power. The leading businessman Dick Smith says Australia needs to embrace the energy source sooner rather than later. We've spoken to Ontario's Energy Minister in Canada, Todd Smith, who says we need to look at what they've done with nuclear power. In the last year, Ontario's wholesale power prices have been around 40% cheaper than New South Wales. And during both of those conversations with Dick and with Todd, they mentioned Will Shackel. He's the 17-year-old founder of Nuclear for Australia. He's been on the front line of this debate in Australia. And on his website, Will says Australia is the only member of the G20 with a ban on nuclear power. The 90s era bans were political, not scientific. As Australia struggles to deal with our energy and climate crisis, we need to consider all options if we want to reach a solution. So Will Shackel is back on the line, the 17-year-old founder of Nuclear for Australia. Will, good morning to you.
Good morning, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
It's interesting, when you started talking about this, and I remember talking to you at the time, there wasn't a big conversation around nuclear energy. Now every 5 minutes it's being debated. Are you encouraged by that?
I think it is incredibly encouraging because, as we know, the path Australia is going down at the moment is a really risky path. No nation has been able to decarbonise with solar and wind, and Australia would be the first. And I think from my position, it's really clear that the nuclear power bans in Australia are untenable, and the nuclear power ban is stabbing ourselves in the foot. Because when we are experiencing an energy and climate crisis, you'd think that we would have all options on the table, but instead our government has stuck their feet in and have decided to have hubris to limit our options and exclude one of the lowest emissions and most reliable power sources. And to me, that makes absolutely no sense, especially when you look around the world and see the benefits that nuclear power is having for so many countries and even, states like Ontario.
You look at the 30 countries around the world that are using nuclear energy as part of their mix, but meanwhile, we won't go near it because of Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese, and they're rubbishing the claim that nuclear power would work here. They say it'll be too expensive, it'll take too long to build. What's really interesting, Will, is the younger people of Australia and the way that they are viewing this issue. They don't have the same hang-ups as older generations.
Certainly not. And you saw that in the last news poll that 2/3 of young people supported a proposal to convert coal-fired power stations to nuclear reactors. And I don't think that's a surprise because young people want action on climate. But I think importantly, they don't want to just be sold lies by politicians. They want actual solutions. And most young people do not believe that we'll actually be able to reach and beat our emissions targets at the moment. The only way to do that is with nuclear power because it is zero emissions and one of the cleanest sources of power ultimately available to us. And the other great thing about nuclear, which I think young people also support, is the fact that it has such a low environmental footprint in terms of the materials it requires, and also compared to other energy sources, it requires just so much less land, which is really important when you consider, agricultural communities and also Indigenous communities where energy infrastructure usually impacts. So I think it's no surprise that young people support nuclear power and they're calling on the government to consider it.
Just a quick one, Will. Are you happy to debate the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen?
I'd love to, and I have debated the Energy Minister actually on ABC's Q&A, which was a fun experience because I think the government there is no defence for banning nuclear power. And I think you can just see it time and time again. Whenever they're questioned on it, they'll bring up all their cliched points that it's a distraction, that it costs too much, that it takes too long to build. None of those are points, none of those are reasons or rational justifications for keeping a 90s era ban, which was rushed through Parliament, which ultimately no Australians had any opportunity to have a say on. So I think it's really clear that we need to reset the nuclear debate because currently it is just all politics and no science.
Well, I
And
think
if we
that's
want to
happening
be
at the moment. If you have a look at what's happening at the moment, there are more people engaging in this debate than ever before, and I think you should take some credit for that. I encourage people to go and have a look at Will's website, nuclearforaustralia.com. Will, let's catch up again, and thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me on, Ben.
Good on you. Will Shackel, nuclearforaustralia.com, only 17 years of age, and he's debated Chris Bowen before on Q&A. Would you like to see that again in the lead up to the next election? Or Will Shackel up against Anthony Albanese?